Water was no longer an obstacle. It was the battlefield. By the time the wolves entered formal waterborne operations, they had already accepted one truth: movement in the swamp would never be clean, fast, or quiet. Water dictated tempo. It reshaped formations. It punished mistakes instantly and without drama. You didn't fight the environment here. You negotiated with it, one decision at a time, until it allowed you to keep moving. The Yellow River marked the transition. Wide, dark, slow-moving, and deceptive, it cut through the training area like a boundary line drawn by something that didn't care about training schedules. From the banks, it looked calm, almost forgiving. But calm in the swamp was always camouflage. Currents shifted where the surface didn't show it. Submerged branches waited like hooks. Logs rolled under the skin of the water when you stepped wrong. The river carried weight, sound, and consequence. Kaylee watched it without blinking. Beside him, Naira's eyes moved constantly, bank to bank, tree line to water line, the subtle places where nothing moved because something was watching. Joran didn't look at the water at all. He looked at the men, at posture, at hands on weapons, at the human students threaded among them, faces tight with the quiet understanding that this was a place you could fail without anyone yelling. Zodiac boats waited nearby, black rubber hulls stacked and deflated, engines silent, looking harmless until you pictured them at night with a full combat load and a current that didn't want you on its surface. Bram flexed his fingers once, as if he could squeeze water into submission. Caldus didn't. Caldus checked tie-down points, eyeing valve stems and seams like he was reading a failure report before it happened. Saela stayed quiet, watching the ranger instructors, tracking the timing and the way their eyes moved. What they were really grading, not what they said they were grading. Waterborne operations did not tolerate freelancing. Boat teams were built deliberately, not by friendships, not by who moved well together on land. The ranger instructors balanced strength, endurance, and leadership, then waited to see if the teams would fight the assignment or make it work. Cale ended up in a boat with Joran and Edric, plus 2 human ranger students, whose names they hadn't earned yet in anyone's head. Naira was placed with Saela, Mira, and Corin, an our-eyes quiet decision that made the point without explaining it. Torin and Mela were in another craft with Varek, and Elowen moved between teams as a rotating boat commander, shifting where friction was most likely to show. Everything began with preparation. Inflation drills were timed. Assembly had to be fast, quiet, and disciplined. Pumps moved in rhythm, shoulders rolling like a machine. Valves were checked by touch in low light. Any hiss of escaping air drew instant correction, not shouted, just the sudden presence of a ranger, instructor, and the cold certainty that you would do it again until it was perfect. Boats were staged, nose out, aligned, ready to launch with minimal movement. Rucks were centered. Weapons were slung tight and high, not because it looked clean, but because one muzzle dip at the wrong time could end a lane before it began. Radios were double-bagged, then triple-bagged when the RRIS saw a corner cut. Sensitive items were sealed and tied down. Nothing was allowed to float free. The river did not return lost equipment. Launching was controlled chaos. Boots sank into mud as the hulls were shoved forward. Water surged around legs. Teams resisted the instinct to rush because rushing on land only costs breath. Rushing on water costs control, and control was the currency here. A rushed launch meant imbalance. Imbalance meant capsizing. Capsizing meant mission failure, cold shock, lost gear, and the kind of attention no one wanted. Once afloat, the river took over. Paddles entered the water, silently, blades angled just enough to bite without splash. The current pushed sideways, forcing constant micro-corrections. Steering wasn't a dramatic sweep. It was subtle pressure through core and shoulders. A language of movement the boat either spoke together or not at all. Communication dropped to almost nothing. Hand signals replaced speech. Eye contact mattered. The boat commander watched the river, the banks, the spacing between craft. Too close invited collision. Too far risked separation, and separation in this terrain didn't mean a minor error. It meant you vanished into the black. Edric's eyes stayed on Kyle's hands when Kyle corrected the paddle cadence. Small adjustments. No ego. Joran watched the spacing. Every few strokes he glanced at the bank, tracking drift by the relationship between tree trunks and the boat's nose. Caldus wasn't in their craft, but his influence was. Every boat stopped during halts and checked tie-downs because Caldus checked his without being told, and everyone else had enough self-preservation to follow. The wolves learned quickly that water amplified mistakes. A dropped paddle echoed louder than a spoken word. A poorly balanced load shifted unexpectedly, throwing off rhythm. A moment of inattention sent a boat drifting off azimuth, requiring correction that cost time and energy. One of the human students, tired hands, wet grip, let his paddle slip for half a second. The blade slapped the surface. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Elowen's head turned. Saela's eyes narrowed. The ranger instructor on the bank wrote something down. No one corrected the human with words. Kylie simply reached across, adjusted the man's hand placement, and returned to cadence like nothing happened. That was leadership in this phase, correcting without breaking the system. Night made everything worse. Under limited visibility, the river became a black mirror. Reflections distorted distance. Shorelines disappeared. NVGs helped, but only marginally. Water absorbed light differently. Ripples created false movement. Depth perception lied constantly. What looked like a solid bank could be floating grass. What looked like open water could be a submerged log waiting to grab your hull. Leaders had to trust instruments. Compass headings were checked obsessively. Time-distance calculations were adjusted on the fly. Drift was measured in feel rather than sight. Naira keyed her wrist compass under her poncho, shielding it from glare, then signaled a correction that was barely more than 2 fingers shifting angle. Her boat adjusted without debate. That was the difference between trained and tired. Tired people argue. Trained people execute. The river was not crossed once. It was crossed again and again. Insert, paddle, land, move, reset, cross back. Do it with less light. Do it with more load. Do it with simulated enemy contact. Blank snapping from the tree line, RIS forcing. Speed where speed broke discipline, forcing discipline where discipline cost time. Every repetition carved the same lesson deeper. Waterborne infiltration was about control, not speed. Precision mattered more than aggression. Discipline outweighed strength. When the boats finally grounded, the work had only begun. Transitioning from water to land was one of the most dangerous moments. Wet boots met unstable footing. Mud sucked at legs. Bodies went from floating to fighting in seconds, and the body hated the switch. Weapons had to come up immediately. Security established while hearts still beat in a boat rhythm and lungs still tasted river air. There was no pause. The swamp offered no safe banks. Soon after came the one-rope bridges. The training area's streams varied wildly, some narrow and fast, others wide and sluggish, all unforgiving. Conventional crossings were often impossible. Wading risked injury, exposure, and loss of equipment. Bridges weren't a nice skill. They were the only way forward. Construction began under pressure. Anchor points were selected carefully. Trees with deep roots, positioned to distribute load correctly. Ropes were thrown, hauled, and tensioned. Knots were tied by feel, hands numb and slick with water. Thane's fingers moved steadily, even when the cold took sensation. Isagar checked the anchor like he didn't trust the tree to exist. Varek set a secondary tie-in without being told, eyes flicking to the RI to see if initiative would be punished or rewarded. The ranger instructors watched everything, saying nothing. Crossing was deliberate, one man at a time, weight distributed carefully. Hands burned from friction, legs trembled with fatigue. Below, water waited patiently. Falling wasn't dramatic, it was just consequence. Equipment followed. Rucks were hauled separately, weapons slung tight to prevent impact. Casualty simulations added complexity. Stretchers rigged, bodies moved slowly, deliberately, with constant communication. Mira's voice stayed low and flat as she called the sequence, keeping panic out of the air even when time bled away. Corin adjusted her stance, compensating for the rope's sway with subtle shifts, not flashy strength. Leadership revealed itself here. Platoon leaders had to sequence movement intelligently. Squad leaders enforced discipline. Team leaders monitored spacing and fatigue. One rushed decision cascaded into failure. One missed redundancy check didn't just risk a fall, it risked the whole element behind you. Then came the worst movement of all. Waist-deep water. No boats, no bridges. Just movement through submerged terrain that resisted every step. Mud clung to legs. Water filled pockets. Rifles were held high, arms aching. Every step forward cost twice the energy and gave half the distance. Formations collapsed naturally. Intervals shortened. Movement slowed. Breathing became labored. Sweat mixed with swamp water. Stinging eyes and open skin. Bram started to push, instinct demanding momentum, and Sailor caught his sleeve. Just once, a silent correction, reminding him that speed here was how you drowned the team. Noise discipline became nearly impossible. Water sloshed, vegetation snapped, bodies bumped unintentionally. Leaders adjusted expectations, focusing on control rather than perfection. Kaeli stopped chasing silence and started chasing spacing. Joran stopped chasing spacing and started chasing direction. Nira balanced both, her attention split like a blade. One edge on terrain, one on people. Navigation in these conditions bordered on the absurd. Azimuths were maintained by counting steps that barely advanced. Landmarks were invisible. Time estimates broke down completely. Only discipline kept the patrol moving forward. Edric rotated the point without needing to be told, taking short turns to preserve focus. Caldus redistributed weight mid-movement, quiet hands moving gear straps. Because fatigue doesn't care if you're proud. Fatigue set in deep. Not the sharp exhaustion of sprinting, but the dull, grinding depletion of continuous resistance. Muscles failed slowly. Willpower became the primary fuel. Some began to stumble. Others compensated silently, shifting loads, offering subtle support without breaking formation. The wolves weren't bonding emotionally. They were becoming functional at a higher level, moving as a single organism, because anything less got people lost. The ranger instructors intervened only when safety demanded it. Everything else was allowed to play out. Waterborne operations were not about tactics alone. They were about trust. Trust in equipment. Trust in leadership. Trust that the man beside you wouldn't lose focus when the environment tried relentlessly to strip it away. Trust that when the river took something, time, heat, skin, patience, you would still have enough discipline left to execute the next order. By the end of this segment, the wolves no longer saw water as terrain to be crossed. They saw it as a domain to be controlled. one that demanded humility, patience, and precision, one that exposed arrogance instantly, one that rewarded cohesion over individual strength. Ahead lay combat operations, raids launched from water, ambushes along canals, patrol bases established on marginal ground. But before any of that could succeed, the wolves had to prove one thing: they could move through the swamp without being broken by it. And now, slowly, painfully, they were learning how.